What happens when a visual effects whiz, a dad blogging phenom, and proud sober advocate all meet in one life? Today's guest has turned childhood chaos, recovery, and creative storytelling into one powerful mission, and he's bringing unfiltered voices along the way. Stay tuned because you're going to want to hear this one.
Welcome to the Sober Life Rocks podcast. You may have made the decision not to drink alcohol, or at the very least, not at work-related events. Whether you've never been a drinker, are in recovery, or made a health-related decision, we see you, and you are not alone. In today's world, networking, socializing, and celebrations often happen over drinks, and the struggle can be real. Through this podcast, we're changing that narrative. We're here to create a community where individuals like you, who choose not to drink or drink less, can find camaraderie, support, and practical advice.
Welcome back to Sober Life Rocks podcast, where we amplify bold, unapologetic voices in the sober movement. But before we dive in, something big is happening. More people than ever are ditching the booze and stepping into leadership, creativity, and impact like never before. And the people driving that movement, they'll be at Amplify Sober Voices. This is the event for sober thought leaders, speakers, writers, podcasters, coaches, influencers, anyone who's ready to turn their sober story into serious impact. And if you're not in the room, you're missing the conversations that are shaping the future. Grab your tickets now at amplifysobervoices.com and join the leaders redefining what's possible. Today's guest is Jason Mayo, founder of Sober Not Subtle, a platform dedicated to raw, unfiltered stories from recovery and mental health communities. He's also a certified recovery peer advocate, contributor to the Sober Curator, and creator of Outnumbered, the award-winning dad blog that once earned him a haha shout-out on Working Mother's 25 Dads Who Rock. Jason spent nearly 30 years leading teams in New York City's visual effects and animation industry. He got sober in 2010, congratulations, and since then has woven together advocacy, storytelling, and personal transformation. He's a children's book author with 2 quirky titles and a debut memoir coming out, In Case of Emergency, Break Childhood, dropping September 9th. Today, we'll dig into how Jason turned creative passion into recovery advocacy, what stories broke him and healed him, and how he's giving voice to the messy, beautiful truths of sober life. Jason, welcome to the program.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. I feel like your podcast voice is so professional. It's like, it really is a great podcast voice. So I have to I have high standards I got to live up to. I'm going to try though. I'm going to try.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're just delighted to have you here. And just so that people can kind of get to know you, can you give me the thumbnail version of what led up to you eventually getting sober? And then we'll kind of dig into what happened after that.
Sure. I always say that my mental health has a drinking problem. And, that's kind of like, my mental health is the gateway drug. It always has been and always will be. And, the long and the short of it is when I was very young, my parents got divorced and, kind of shut down after that. I became, outgoing and class clown type of thing, but I never, ever, ever talked to anybody about how I felt. It was almost like the great distraction, right? I started living with depression and anxiety because, nothing came out. It was all inside. And, just developed all these resentments against anybody that I thought was going to disappoint me or leave. And then I started drinking when I was really young, and we all know how that goes. I finally found something that put me at ease and helped me numb and distracted me. And it happened all through college. I had a really bad knee surgery in college and wound up having surgery in this, podunk town where I went to school. And the doctor prescribed 90 days of hydrocodone with refills. Mm-hmm. So that launched my career into opioids too. And, I married with 2 daughters, and I was working in an industry that culturally drinking and drugging is very accepted and almost encouraged. And, things just started to get really, really bad. And as life got more complicated, my depression and my anxiety got more complicated, and I really just was chasing numb, to a point where I couldn't function anymore. And I hit a bunch of bottoms, and it just came a time where my perspective shifted. I always say it's like substance use disorder is a disease of perspective, right? You can look at things one way or you can look at things another way. And for some reason, I hit one of those bottoms and my perspective shifted on everything. And as my old sponsor used to say, like, you're seeing things through a new set of glasses. And I was able to get sober with the help of a lot of people. And for me, it was my family, right? I know you got to get sober for yourself, and stay in recovery for yourself. But for me, I needed a catalyst, and it was, I never did anything awful, I think, by like the standards of awful out there. I didn't go to rehab. I didn't, wreck my car, get arrested for a DWI, anything like that. But the amount of emotional security that I stole from my wife and my young children at the time and everyone around me was just, it was unbearable. So, I launched myself into recovery. For me, there's so many different modalities of recovery and pathways to recovery, but for me, it was a 12-step program. And, my therapist at the time, who was our marriage counselor, said if I put as much effort into getting sober as I did into drinking and depression, then I should be okay. And, I did everything everybody told me. And, in recovery, my life has just evolved. My wife is still with me. She's a saint. We've been together for more than 30 years now. My kids, one's out of college and one's in college. And, I'm on medication. I talk a lot about mental health, and I'm an advocate for medication if it's right for people, and if it's prescribed by a doctor, because for me, it changed my life. It gives me a chance to kind of get out of bed in the morning with an even keel, like a fresh start. And then what I do with it, with my recovery, is up to me after that. But, I suffered for so long, not realizing that there was a way out, both mentally and, physically and spiritually, whatever you want to say. So, I mean, that's the nutshell version. That's I
Thank you
think.
for that.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to kind of dig into is, as you said, in your industry, um, drinking was the currency of connection. That's the phrase that I often sort of hear people say. So this day came and you decided to dive into recovery head first and do all the things. How how did you navigate that in your workplace? Did you tell people? Did you just sort of like sideways, crab step through it? What did you do?
Well, at first, I was like really, I don't know if I'd call it ashamed. I was ashamed of a lot of different things in early recovery, but I was just afraid of the stigma,
Mhm.
because I didn't know a lot of people, if anybody, in recovery, like to my knowledge. And, like you said, currency, that's such a great word. You use the word currency. And I didn't want people to feel awkward around me, going out for dinner and drinks. It was my whole persona. Like we had beer taps in my office. Like I convinced my partner to put in beer taps. So it was really part of who I was. Um, but, just I think I started out by telling one person. I told my business partner, and just let him know I'm going to be gone every single day from 12 to 1 o'clock. I'm getting sober, and I have a meeting down the street, and it's not going to affect the way I work. It's actually going to help me, but I just want you to know because I want somebody to know. And he was super understanding. We'd been partners for over 5 years at that point. And then I told another person who was always relying on me at work, my head of sales. And it turns out his dad was like 30, 40 years sober before he passed away. So, and, then little by little, like I started meeting people just because of picking up on language and
Mhm.
noticing little tells, like at a party, somebody would see me drinking, a club soda and lime, and they'd be like, "You're not drinking tonight?" I'd be like, "No, I'm just not drinking." And like anymore, I was like trying not to. They're like, "Are you in recovery?" I'd be like, "Why are you?"
Yeah.
So, over the first 2 or 3 years, Well, until a few years ago, I was never publicly in recovery. I wasn't recovering out loud, but I also didn't push away from it. You know, if
Mm.
somebody asked me, I was more than happy to talk about it. Planting seeds, but I don't know. I just didn't think that there was a reason or a purpose for me at the time to post things on social media. It just was never who I was, you know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's sort of how it started.
Because, you and I got sober similar time frames. I was 2005, and people didn't talk about it back then at
No.
all. And the stigma was real.
Yeah.
And like you, my job literally was to take people out and wine them and dine them.
Hmm.
And the best advice I got at my 12 step meetings was like, if you are out and uncomfortable, just leave early. Well,
Hmm.
I'm holding the corporate credit card. I can't very well do that. Right.
Right.
So, but I would get people sort of looking at me, or sometimes oh, come on,
Yeah.
join the fun. How did you navigate those?
Well, you always hear like you have to change people, places, and things, right? When you get sober, because it's just not healthy to go back to all this. But I was married with with a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we had made a life with our friends. And, I wasn't hanging around with drug dealers or, shady people, if you want to say like, but I had friends, we'd go to barbecues, we'd go out to dinner, and they liked to drink. So I couldn't just remove myself from our
Mhm.
social circle. But, again, I was just straight with people. Like I just told them, I'm not drinking anymore. And at first there was the whole, oh, really? Again? Which kind of hurt because I never really thought people noticed that I had a problem and that I was trying to
Mm.
stop here and there. But, and my wife I couldn't go into a restaurant, whether it be for work or just socially, without having a panic attack when I first got sober, because I was just so not used to navigating any feelings on my own without drugs or
Mhm.
alcohol. And, my wife would have to go into a restaurant and let me know if it was too small, pick a table that's, closer to the door. It was like I was a mess when I first got sober. But, my wife would taste the drinks for me. And then I found that the more people I told in my circle, the more supportive they were. And people start asking questions like, I was thinking maybe I might have it, so I found that the more I opened up about it to people that were interested or asked me, the better it made me feel about myself in recovery too.
Mm.
Slowly ridding
That's
the
beautiful.
stigma from my mind.
Yeah. And I think that that's a great message for today, because things are changing. People are talking about it more. I mean, we're having this podcast, for crying out loud, with two
Yeah.
people who grew up and it got sober at a time when this just didn't happen. But I do think that on an individual level, your experience is a great roadmap for others. Like, just start with one person and then
Mm.
one person and then one person, and just observe um, how you're received.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
really like that.
for me, it was about really building my community in my recovery, especially with my 12 step meetings. So I built like that foundation and just learned
Mhm.
from those people about how they deal with it. And then everything else kind of followed. Just to jump ahead to, 6 months ago or whatever it was, when I had my 15-year anniversary, my wife is really good at surprising me with things, and it's half because, I don't pay attention and half because she's just really good at planning. But I was downstairs playing video games with my friends, and my daughter was calling me to get upstairs because, something's wrong with the dog or whatever. And I was like, leave me alone. I'm playing video games. I'll be up in half an hour. And she was just getting increasingly upset with me. So finally, I was just like, leave me alone. Like I couldn't break my concentration. And then all of a sudden, like I'm in a studio here. I've built a little gaming studio for myself. I see out of the corner of my eye a couple of people. I turn around, it's like friends of mine from Boston. And then it's friends of mine that I haven't seen from here and here. And I look out and there's like 30 people in my basement waiting for me. And it turns out she like planned a 15-year anniversary for me party with all of my friends, some sober and some not. And there were balloons upstairs and a big cake. Like I missed everything. I noticed nothing. But at this point in my life, it's so good. to know that my recovery is also important to the people closest to me in my life. And it's just a testament to, how when you're in your, active addiction, how much it affects people. But then the other way around, it's like, I love that they're supportive of my recovery because I know it's important to them too. So that was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And,
Wow, that's amazing.
of course I cried because I'm a crier, but
Well, that's beautiful.
yeah.
So I kind of want to talk a little bit about the fact that living your life out loud is not entirely new to you because you had this dad blog. So tell me about that. When did you start that? What was the point and what
I don't, there might
what
not have been a
happened?
point. Ask my wife. There was no point. Um, I, I have a personality where I need the dopamine, right? And, there are genes that people possess that make you more susceptible to risky behavior and needing more dopamine. And that's why I'm who I am. And one of the things that happened is it was back in 2008. You couldn't help but notice all of the mommy blogs that were around. They were posting on social media, they were online. Everything was about parenting and mommy blogs, mommy blogs, mommy blogs. And a lot of them were about like, you know, I drink, drinking wine and playing with my kid. It was just very frivolous and but that was okay. And I just was like, you know what? I've always loved to write. What if I did like a dad blog, right? And there were a couple of dad blogs out there, but not very many. And I started commenting on mommy blogs and dad blogs, so people got to know me. And then, I was like, you know what? Of course, I'm going to start my own. I'm going to do the branding. I'm going to do like all this stuff overnight. And I started this blog, and some of the mommy bloggers took me under their wing and really started to like shout me out to people. And at first I said to myself that I was writing it so I can have archives of my times with my kids. So that one day when I'm old and gray, or at least old because I'm gray now, then one day they'll be able to look back at that and appreciate like all these, little anecdotal things I wrote about us. But really what it was at that point was I just needed people to notice me. I know that now. My motives weren't true, and I started living this life of like this really funny, raw dad blogger that told the truth, and like everything was like out there in the open, and I loved writing it. It was great, and it had success, and I met a lot of great people. But I also, when I got sober 2 years later, I was like, I don't want to hear myself talk or see myself anywhere anymore because this is not who I want to be. And, it took me a little while to write regularly sober again. And I wrote for another 6 years on that dad blog. But, that was, like you said, it was like the first time that I really was putting myself out there on a platform. And I loved it. I really did love it. But I also was pretending to be somebody that, I mean, I was a good dad, I think, everything I wrote about was true, but the feelings weren't necessarily true. And I was, I always say there's something I read in my 12-step book, you're either the person you are or the person you want people to think that you are. And before I got sober, I was the person I wanted people to think that I was. So it was an awakening, and I'm glad I did it because I can go back and look at stuff. And I think it led to, wanting to do something now in recovery, just with different motives.
So that's kind of where I want to pivot now. So you continued along with that job, you continued along with that blog, and then over the course of time, something has shifted in you. And so I want to know like what led up to that shift, and now what are you doing today that's completely a different turn?
Right. Well, I was always very stressed out and very anxious as a person in general. But because I didn't really let people in and let people know what I was really feeling, I would be the person that everybody talked to. I was the listener. I was the fixer. I was that person that everybody was like, oh, let Jason do it. He can do it. And inside, I was dying. Like I wanted to literally be wheeled away to a psych ward so I could just rest. And it was a painful existence. And I had a passion for people, but I never had a passion for the creative side of my business. I like doing things creatively on my own, but I didn't get like jazzed up about, a paper towel commercial or something like that, or a music video. I just, I just wanted to make money. And, COVID hit, okay, and we closed the studio in the city and decided we'd all work from home. And you know what? Like I can count on maybe one hand how many times I had dinner with my wife and kids throughout my career. And being home and watching Netflix with my wife, setting boundaries, being able to set boundaries with work, whether they liked it or not, and working on my recovery. And I took up streaming video games, and I wound up building this whole gaming setup, and on Twitch. And I was just happy, but I was detaching slowly from work. And it got to the point about 2.5 years ago where I just said to my wife, I go, I don't know what we're going to do like about money, but I can't do this anymore. Like I didn't get sober to be miserable. And pretty much every other aspect of my life feels really good right now, but I am still miserable at work and I just can't take it anymore and I can't do it anymore and I don't want to do it. And she was just like, Jason, whatever you want to do, I want you to be happy because if you're happy, we're happy and we'll figure it out. So I started researching and asking some friends from my 12-step program, if they know of anybody that's in the recovery field, behavioral health, whatever it might be. And I was steered towards somebody that worked at this local recovery community center. And I called her. Somebody gave me her number. I called her and she talked to me for a while about different types of careers and ways I could possibly, work myself in there. I visited that recovery center and they were so nice and talked to me about the profession and I wound up taking classes. And I'm talking about certified recovery peer advocacy, or just being a peer advocate. And I was doing the classes and all that stuff while I was working without telling my partners, my business partners. And when I finally was done with the classes and knew that I can do something, I told them. And, they were very understanding. I think they wanted me to be happy and all this stuff. And I said, we either have to sell the company, you have to buy me out of the company, or we have to close the company because it's got to be one of them because I'm leaving and, I'm giving you 3 months or whatever. And it wasn't that harsh, but, and, it all worked out. Suffice to say, they're still there. I got to walk away and it was great. And, I pivoted toward, was looking for a job. I hadn't done a resume in over 25 years. I hadn't been on an interview in 25 years. And that expression, like if you could do it all over again, knowing what you know now, right? Like I got to do that. Like I got to start all over as a 54-year-old man with 54 years of experience. And the way I approached it was I felt so good and so confident. And, I was able to talk about real things and not pretend and just lay it all out there and be honest. And it was all about recovery and I was in recovery. So I wound up getting a job at this not-for-profit that's local here. I can't mention the name, but it's a wonderful, wonderful company, and they have these recovery centers. And and now I coach some people individually. They allow me to bring a meeting into the local jail every other week. I have a recovery meeting just for dads that I facilitate. I get to speak at schools. I get to train people in Narcan. And, we get to plan these fun, sober events like roller skating, ice skating, fishing trip. It's not a money thing for sure, but it's the happiest I've ever been and the greatest thing that I've ever done. And I've learned so much about just not only this profession, but how to handle yourself and how to treat people in a work environment and culture that's very, very different. That's really into self-care, which was not a thing in my other industry. Like, you wore that as a badge of honor that you were dying,
Yeah.
and you were overworked. But yeah, so that's where I am with the work thing. And then, starting the website, the Sober Not Subtle thing, which is, we could talk about if you want to, or whatever.
Well, I want to talk about the book because
Okay.
you were so kind to send me an advance copy and I read much of it. What I want to say is that I saw myself in so much of your story,
Mm,
especially the childhood stuff. And sure, change the names and dates, but I think that so many of us, as children, didn't know that what we were going through was not good. Like we just only
yeah.
knew what we knew, and we were managing the best that we could. But tell me about, like, how did you decide to write this memoir, and what who are you hoping to reach with it?
Okay, so the decision wasn't really made by me. It just kind of happened, and it's interesting. So when I first got sober, I had a sponsor and that I loved, and we started working on step work. And his first step assignment for me was he said, "I want you to write out your drinking history." And then we're going to read it, and we're going to outline where you were powerless and where your life was unmanageable, and we're just going to learn a lot about these patterns. You know how the deal. So I wrote, and of course I didn't scribble or do some bullet points. I wrote 15. I typed 15 pages of my story, and it started from when I was a kid, when my parents got divorced, all the way until my first 12 step meeting. And I wrote it in a narrative because, again, that's just who I am, and I had to go and make it into a whole story. And we read it, and it was great, and I put it away. And I just, put it on hard drive or Google Drive or whatever it was. And, about a year and a half ago or so, I don't know, I was just cleaning out my Google Drive, and I saw something, and it was just like it was saved as the first sentence of whatever the doc was, so I hadn't noticed it. And I opened it, and it was the step one assignment. And I read it, and I cried, and it brought back a lot of shame and picked a lot of scabs. And I just said, you know what? I just want to keep writing. So I just broke it out into sections. Like I wrote about more about the divorce, and then I wrote more about elementary school, and then I wrote more about when I started drinking, and then I wrote about all these. I always say that like writing is very different than talking.
Mm.
And my analogy for this is, everybody has like CDs, right? So I have this absurd CD collection of like 1,000 CDs that are still sitting on one of those monster spinning pieces of furniture, right? And when I was listening to my CDs, I was listening to all 1,000 CDs, right? I was choosing, and it was like a whole ritual, and I listened to so much music. Now that I listen to Spotify, I listen to the same damn 5 albums over and over and over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
again because I don't remember what albums I have. And it's the same with me for writing. When I started writing, it opened up a whole world of memories that I haven't thought about in so long because when you write, you describe things in detail. And it's like an old computer, like the defragmenting kind of thing that
Mm-hmm.
happens. Like everything's all over again. It starts coming together. And, I set a goal. I was like, I want to write 10,000 words. And then it became 20,000. And then it became 30, and then 40, and then 50, and then 60. And I was like, oh my God, like, I think I need to take this seriously. And, that's where it came from. Like I never planned to do it. I just found if I didn't find that thing, I probably wouldn't have. It's never been my thing. It's always been short form for me. So yeah.
But
So
it's
that's how
written
it
it's
happened.
written with that voice of that short form past of yours. As soon as I started reading it, I was like, oh yeah, I recognize the blogger style in this,
Yeah.
because each one feels like a little mini blog, but it has that through thread of it being your story,
Well, I
which
think
is
that's
kind of
it.
cool.
Yeah, and if you're gonna write something long form, like it's gonna seem really, really, or at least it did to me, seem very overwhelming after a while. And I had to keep going back to just write a chapter. And don't, it's not in order. It doesn't have to be chronological, nothing. Just write the chapter and stream of consciousness, and you'll go back and put it in Grammarly and correct all the grammar and the spelling later. And, that's why it kept going and going because every time I thought of something, I just wrote another chapter. And, if I didn't look at it short form like that, then I probably would have been so overwhelmed and stressed out that I would have like pulled my hair out. So,
Hmm. So, because you have this sort of background in writing, this may be a little bit of a question for you that I don't know if you can answer to people like myself. I mean, I've written two books, but they're business books.
mhm.
But I've talked to a lot of people who are like, I'd love one day to write something about my recovery journey that's going to help other people. What would you say to them?
I would say write if you want to write. Um, I was in the jail today, talking to the guys, and we were talking about things that we can do and things that they can do while they're in jail to change their behavior. So when they leave, their behavior is changed and they have things that they can continue to do. And whether that be read the Bible or meditate or write or whatever it is, what are you doing? And there was one guy that was like, I'm writing a book about my life. And he said, I have 440 pages written so far. And I was like, oh my God. But he wasn't thinking about writing a book. He was just doing it because it was therapeutic for him. And so that to me is like, if you want to write, then write and don't think about, what's motivating you other than you just want to put it on paper. And if you're comfortable with writing something personal and the world seeing it, then that's a choice that you have to make. Like I'm really nervous. Like I wasn't nervous writing it. I was hysterical crying writing it because I was just overwhelmed with emotion. But now I'm nervous. Like my wife's read it, my mom and dad have read it, all the people closest to me, and everybody's okay with it. It's actually inspired conversations I never thought would happen between my
Mm.
mom, my dad, my brother, myself, and my wife. And it's been really healing after the fact. But I'm like just nervous because I'm nervous about people seeing it, and just revealing these intimate parts of myself and details that I don't know if I'm ready for everybody to read it, but I just keep telling myself that, just like the Sober Not Subtle, the blog thing, and just like sharing lived experience with people in my profession, if it's going to help someone, and you said it before and you nailed it when you said back in, the old days, um, the stigma was real. And it used to be like the drunk was the wino that was drinking out of a paper bag, sleeping under a park bench. And the drug addict was either the rock star, or the junkie with the needle hanging out of his arm, right? That was it.
Mhm.
Those were the two things that came to mind. So, you know, drinking is one thing, but like the opioids, I'm a little bit like, because part of me is still like, oh, people are going to know I took pills or know that I did cocaine and know that I lied to my wife. Like but she's okay with it, and she's
And the other
encouraging.
thing I'll say is just like I started to say before, I was identifying about myself. At no point did I sit in judgment of you. It was because we're all, quite frankly, self-centered.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so as I read things like that, I'm filtering it through my experience and like, oh wow, I can totally relate to that. Or, oh wow, like thank God I didn't go down that road. Thank God he's better. Like it's
Yeah.
all through my own filter. So I would worry less about that. And for anybody who is listening, thinking about our hope, our goal is to normalize sober choices, whether that's sober-ish, sober curious, completely sober because of health reasons, religious reasons, and recovery.
Yeah.
That it all is fine. It's all a choice. I mean, gosh, when we used to talk about people meditating, all you thought about was like the monks with their om.
Yeah.
And now it's common practice for people in a, C-suite
It's just
executives
wellness.
about it. It's just
Yeah.
wellness. And so that's really, I love that you're putting this book out there because to me, it's part of the normalizing the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not Matthew Perry, right? So, and I'm not Nikki Six or any of those guys. And I feel like there's way more like regular civilians that than there are celebrities, even though they're the
That's right.
ones that stand out. So, I say it, and I don't know if it's the preface or wherever it is, but it doesn't always look like what we just talked about. It could be the mom in the carpool, or the guy in the next cubicle, or the guy laughing a little too loud at the party. So I'm hoping to reach those people, the people that are scared to have the conversation, that we all should be having.
Yeah.
And I hate saying normal people, but it's like, because I'm anything but, I think, but just the people that don't think that,
Everyday people.
yeah, that they're not worthy of telling their story because it's like I said, they didn't go to jail or they didn't, go to rehab or whatever. It's just about feeling better,
Yeah. I love
So
it. Okay, with our last little bit of time, I want to know more about Sober Not Subtle. Tell me about that.
Sure. So this comes directly from the dad blog, right? So, when I first started working in this profession, I was inspired, like more than I've ever been in my entire life, to write. Because I took a very, very I hadn't written probably in years, aside from trade magazines, articles for work. I hadn't written anything personal in years, since 2016. And, I said, I'm so inspired. I'm going to start a blog, and it's going to be a recovery blog. And I called it originally, If It Hurts, It Helps. And that comes from, I always say, like, the most messed up things that we've done become our greatest assets in recovery to help people. So if it
Mhm.
hurts, it eventually helps. So that was the name of the blog. And I wrote a whole bunch of stuff, 20, entries or whatever it was. And I was putting it out there, but not like crazy putting it out there. And then I was just like, you know what? I'm starting to get sick of hearing myself talk again. And it sounds very depressing. And it sounds very niche, like only recovery focus, only my story. And I was like, what if I just did a blog and the whole point was to have everybody else write for the blog?
Mm.
It's not a brand new idea, but it's something that would make me feel better, and it's something that would make me more interested. And I started writing for the Sober Curator, which,
Mhm.
shout out to the Sober Curator and Elise Bryson, because it's such a wonderful publication. It's
We
just a
love
sober,
Elise.
oh,
Mhm.
she's a tornado of humanity. And I started writing for Elise and the Sober Curator, and I was like, this is I could do this. And I started, talking to the 30 other writers every month and just seeing how amazing these people are, and their voices. So I started Sober Not Subtle, and it's it's basically just a call to action. Like, anybody that is in recovery, has friends or relatives in recovery in the behavioral health profession. It could be anybody, anything to do with mental health or recovery. You're welcome to send in your story. And then there's resources, podcast picks, and all things like that. There's, stuff about the peer movement. There's a whole lot of stuff. There's a merch store where everything goes to charity. But people just started sending stuff in. So I think we're up to about 130 articles, and I write
That's amazing.
probably 5% of the articles now, 10%. So it's been amazing, like an amazing learning experience, and also a full-time job, which makes me want
Yeah.
to tear my hair out. But I'm glad I did it. And, and I'm hoping you write something too. Well, you're going to write something. I'm telling you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I
It's
would love to.
happening. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds great. Jason, I cannot tell you, this to me has just been a fascinating conversation because I think writers are a different breed. And like you said, if you're compelled to do it, like you have to. But I love hearing about kind of your journey of how you have self-expressed throughout your entire life. And so thank you for sharing all that with us.
Thank you. And it's been awesome talking to you and hearing your perspective. And thanks for taking a look at the book. Like, not many people have read it, so it's nice to have
Mm.
a fresh perspective of somebody that doesn't know me. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Thank you
Oh
so
my
much.
gosh, it was totally my honor.
Oh,
So, Jason's journey reminds us that all of our stories, the creative ones, raw, painful, hopeful, like they all matter. And when we share them, we heal and we connect and we build community. And if his story hit home for you, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone else who needs to know recovery is real and human. And if you're ready to take your voice further, please grab your ticket to Amplify Sober Voices on January 15th, 2026, a place where bold, unfiltered stories will shape the future of the sober movement. Visit amplifysobervoices.com and join us there. Until next time, stay brave, stay curious, and keep living subtly but sober.
very nice.